Ever feel like groundbreaking discoveries are kind of locked away? Like, only for people with those fancy degrees and like years and years of research. Well, get ready, because today we're tossing that idea right out the window.
Mm-hmm.
We're diving into accidental genius. It's all about everyday curiosity, leading to, well, extraordinary breakthroughs, really. We're going to meet 4 people who made their mark on science, and get this, without the usual, credentials.
The really interesting thing about these folks is how they weren't tied down by how academia works, all the rules and expectations. They just followed their curiosity, which is how they stumbled onto huge discoveries, things the rest of the scientific world had totally missed.
It's like that saying, the expert misses nothing except the exception. So who are these rule breakers? We've got William Herschel, Felix, Guy Callendar, and Jane Goodall. A musician, a self-taught microbiologist, a steam engineer, and she was really into primates. Quite the lineup, right?
Absolutely. Their backgrounds just go to show that big ideas can come from anyone, anywhere, anytime. Really makes you think twice about who gets to be called a scientist, doesn't it?
It does. And speaking of shaking things up, let's start with William Herschel, the musician who ended up changing how we see the universe.
Yeah.
Picture it. It's the late 1700s, and when he's not writing symphonies, he's grinding lenses for his own telescopes. A true Renaissance man. What got him hooked on astronomy alongside his music?
It seems like Herschel had this deep, need to understand what's out there beyond what we already knew. He wasn't content just looking at the night sky. He wanted to, really get into it, uncover its secrets.
And uncover them he did. This is a big one. Herschel finds a brand new planet, Uranus, a discovery that hadn't happened since ancient times. Can you imagine? Finding a whole planet. Talk about changing how we see the solar system. I bet people were skeptical.
Oh, there was definitely controversy. Some astronomers straight up refused to believe him at first. But Herschel was meticulous, his observations, his calculations. Eventually, they had to admit he was right.
Speaking of meticulous, the research you sent mentioned Herschel cataloging double star systems. What was that all about?
So Herschel was captivated by these double stars. Basically, pairs of stars that look close together from Earth. He documented over 800 of them, carefully, really meticulously. But it wasn't just for the sake of making a list.
I was just going to ask, what's so important about double stars? It sounds like a ton of work.
It was. But by tracking them, he gave us crucial information about the life cycles of stars. See, when you study how those star pairs interact, their gravity and all, you get clues about their mass, how far apart they are, how they change over time. His work built the foundation for a whole new way of understanding the cosmos.
Wow, that's amazing. From concertos to, well, charting the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
Herschel's story just goes to show how powerful curiosity can be. Makes you wonder, what are we fascinated by today that seems impossible? And what could those questions lead to if we actually chase after the answers?
Exactly. It's a good reminder to never, ever underestimate a curious mind. Sometimes the most groundbreaking stuff happens when we go beyond what's expected.
You said it. And speaking of going beyond the expected, our next accidental genius tackled a really scary problem of the time: deadly bacterial infections. It's the early 1900s, no antibiotics yet. Enter Felix. He was a self-taught microbiologist who made a wild discovery: bacteriophages. Yeah. I'll be honest, I had to look that one up. So what are these bacterial things?
Bacteriophages are viruses, but the good kind. They infect and destroy bacteria. Think of them like natural tiny weapons in the fight against infections.
Whoa, okay. So not chemicals like antibiotics, but using viruses to, eat the bacteria? That's kind of freaky, but cool. How did he even find those things?
So Jarrell was looking into dysentery and locust talk about specific, and he noticed something weird. Some of the bacteria in his lab were dying off, and he thought, something's killing them off.
Something was taking out the bad bacteria, okay? But how do you figure out it was a virus? Those things are tiny. You can't just see them.
Good point. He used this process, filtration. Basically, he ran the liquid from the dead bacteria through a filter, but like a super fine one, so fine it'd trap any bacteria. Then he put that filtered liquid onto a fresh batch of bacteria, and guess what?
They died too.
They died, meaning whatever was doing the killing was smaller than bacteria.
That's seriously clever. And that's how he found viruses that attack bacteria. And he called them bacteriophages, which literally means bacteria eater. Wait, there's more, right? He didn't just find them, he used them.
You got it. He basically invented phage therapy using these viruses to fight infections. Treated stuff like chicken typhoid and dysentery, which were huge killers back then, and it worked.
Way ahead of his time. Didn't phage therapy have a comeback recently?
Yeah. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria are a huge problem now, so scientists are taking another look at Durrell's work. Proof that sometimes old solutions are the best, right?
What's old is new again.
Yeah.
Now, on to our next accidental genius, Guy Callendar. This one goes way back to the early days of climate change, long before it was a global thing.
Okay, so it's 1938, Guy Callendar, he was a steam engineer, and he starts noticing something about rising temperatures around the world. He thinks they're connected to CO2 emissions.
Hold on, back up. Steam engineer. What made him an expert on global temperatures and CO2?
Turns out Callendar loved weather patterns, meteorology, and he was really, really meticulous about keeping records, like really into it. So as he's looking at his weather data, he starts to see a pattern, and it's getting warmer.
Okay, so he sees it's getting warmer. But how did he make the leap to CO2?
Well, think about it. Steam engineer. He knew how gases worked.
Right.
And he knew that people were burning more and more fossil fuels, which meant...
More CO2.
Exactly.
So he's putting it all together, more CO2, temperatures rising, and he comes up with
Callendar effect. His idea was that all this extra CO2 from human activity, that's what was making the planet warmer.
He figured that out in 1938, decades before anyone was talking about climate change seriously. He was a visionary.
Totally. And he didn't just guess, he did the math. He figured out that we'd already released something like 150 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, mostly from burning fossil fuels.
Wow, just wow. But if he knew all this back in the 1930s, why did it take so long for people to listen to him?
It's sad, but a lot of scientists back then just didn't believe him. It was too radical an idea at the time, I guess.
It really makes you think how many other huge discoveries are out there, just waiting for someone with the guts to look for them. Speaking of which, our last accidental genius takes us deep into the jungles of Tanzania. A young Jane Goodall, and she was fascinated by chimpanzees. She's a household name now, but she didn't start out with a fancy degree in, primatology?
Nope, not at all. You know, her lack of formal training might have been her biggest strength. She wasn't stuck in the old ways of thinking. It let her come at her research with totally fresh eyes.
She's a perfect example of how not having the degree can be an advantage. You're not limited by what you're supposed to think, right? You can just observe, ask all the questions. So how'd she go from a young woman who loves animals to, well, Jane Goodall? Yeah. World expert on chimps.
It all started with her love for animals, especially primates. She'd dreamed of studying them in Africa since she was a kid.
It's amazing how many people find their passion early on. But dreaming's one thing, making it happen's another. How'd she go from dreaming of Africa to actually living there, studying chimps?
She was determined, I'll give her that. Saved up money working as a waitress, a secretary, and finally had enough to get to Kenya. And get this, she meets Louis Leakey, the famous paleontologist. And he's blown away by her passion, so he offers her a job as his secretary.
Wow, talk about a lucky break. Sometimes it really is about being in the right place, right time.
For sure, a turning point in her life. Leakey saw how much potential she had, and he pushed her to go for her dream. Those chimps were calling.
And that's how she ended up in Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania, right? I can't imagine what that must have been like. A young woman heading into the unknown, just her and the chimps.
It was unheard of back then. Most primatologists stayed far away from their subjects. But Goodall, she wanted to be closer, to understand them on their own terms.
She lived among them for years, didn't she? That takes guts and dedication. So tell me, what amazing things did she find out during her time in Gombe? What did she discover that surprised everyone else?
Well, first off, she saw them making and using tools, which back then everyone thought was unique to humans. That alone completely changed how we understood primate intelligence. I mean, it really made people rethink what it meant to be human, you know? Up until then, using tools, that was our thing. It set us apart from animals.
Totally. It's mind-blowing. So there's Jane Goodall, no fancy degrees, heads into the jungle, and boom, makes a discovery that turns everything upside down. But I'm guessing not everyone was thrilled about that, right? The scientific community, I mean.
You'd be right. There was pushback, for sure. Some scientists weren't happy with her methods, said she wasn't qualified enough. Some even said because she got so close to the chimps, her observations couldn't be trusted.
It's like a pattern with these accidental geniuses, isn't it?
Yeah.
Always someone saying, you're not doing it right, just because they didn't follow the rules. Makes you think, what other amazing discoveries are we missing out on, just because they came from the wrong person?
Right. It shows how science really works sometimes. You have to shake things up, challenge what everyone thinks is true, and sometimes those challenges, they come from unexpected places.
For sure. But with Goodall, She stuck with it, you know. Her research, her passion, it finally convinced even the biggest doubters. Everything was so detailed, so well recorded, they couldn't ignore it anymore. And she didn't stop with the tools, did she? What else did she learn about chimps in Gombe?
Her work showed that chimps were way more complex socially than anyone thought. Their communication, the power struggles, how they share affection, and how brutal they can be. She even saw a war between two different chimp groups.
Whoa, a war, like an actual organized fight between groups of chimps? That's intense.
It was a huge deal. Back then, people thought war was just a human thing, because of how our societies work, our brains. Goodall's work showed that conflict goes way deeper, maybe even back to our shared ancestors with chimps.
That's kind of scary, but also really makes you think. It's like every new thing Goodall found out about chimps showed us more about ourselves. They were more like us than anyone knew. No wonder she became the top chimp expert in the world.
Totally. And what she did, it wasn't just about chimps. Her research changed how we see animal intelligence, social behavior, even what it means to be human.
So we've got our 4 accidental geniuses. William Herschel, the musician who discovered a planet. Felix, the self-taught guy who figured out phage therapy. Guy Callendar, the steam engineer who predicted climate change. And Jane Goodall, the chimp expert who started with just a love for animals. A pretty diverse group, right? Different backgrounds, different passions. But they've got a lot in common, too, besides not having the usual scientific credentials.
Definitely. They were all incredibly dedicated to really observing and analyzing, They weren't satisfied with easy answers. They dug deeper, questioned everything, followed the evidence wherever it led.
Herschel grinding his own lenses to get a clearer look at the stars. Durrell with his superfine filters to find those tiny phages. Callendar going through mountains of weather data. And Goodall, years in the jungle with those chimps. That takes serious dedication.
It really does. It reminds us that big discoveries, they need patience, careful observation, and a lot of hard work. There are no shortcuts to real innovation.
It's not enough to have a good idea. You got to put in the time, the effort, test it out, analyze it to make it real, and trust your gut even when people tell you you're wrong.
So true. And you got to be open to surprises. Sometimes the most amazing discoveries happen when you least expect them.
Like that saying, chance favors the prepared mind, right? You got to be ready to see the possibilities even when they're hidden. But it can't be easy, being the one who sees things differently, who rocks the boat. What were some of the challenges these accidental geniuses faced on their journeys?
Well, like we've been talking about, they dealt with a lot of skepticism, doubt, even people making fun of them, the scientific community, they weren't always welcoming. You're not one of us, that kind of thing. Their methods were questioned, their results. Sometimes people even said they made it all up.
That's got to hurt, right? Putting your heart and soul into something only to be told it's worthless just because you don't have the right letters after your name.
For sure. Herschel had people refusing to believe Uranus was real, a whole new planet. Durrell's phage therapy, even though it worked, got overshadowed by antibiotics for a long time. And Callendar, his warnings about climate change, they were basically ignored for decades. And now look at us.
It makes you realize challenging the status quo, it comes with a price. It takes courage to stand up for what you believe in, especially when everyone else is telling you you're wrong.
And yet they did it. They kept going, even when it was hard. Because they believed in their work. They knew they were onto something big.
It makes you wonder, what if they had gotten more support early on?
Yeah.
Would things have been different? Would their discoveries have been accepted faster, made a bigger impact sooner?
It's hard to know for sure. But what we can learn is that science needs to be open-minded, inclusive. We need to welcome different ideas, different ways of thinking, not shut them down.
Exactly. Who knows where the next big discovery will come from? It could be a big-shot researcher in a fancy lab or someone tinkering in their basement. It's about fostering that curiosity, that drive to learn, wherever it comes from.
For sure. Diversity of thought, that's what makes science great. When you have different perspectives coming together, that's when amazing things happen.
Their stories are inspiring, but let's be real. Most of us aren't geniuses, accidental or otherwise. What can we learn from these folks? How can we be more curious, make a difference, even if we don't have a lab or a PhD?
That's what's so great about this. You don't need a fancy degree to make a difference. We're all born curious, and that's how we learn and grow, right? Explore a new hobby, dive into something you find fascinating. Just pay attention to the world around you. That's how it starts.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to ask questions, even if they sound silly. Question everything, even the things everyone says are true. Look for different points of view, even if they challenge your own.
And don't give up. Just like our amateur scientists, even when it gets tough, keep going. You never know what amazing things you might discover.
It's really empowering, these stories. Makes you realize we all have that potential inside us, that drive to explore, to learn, to make a difference. And the best part is, you don't need a fancy lab or a bunch of funding to do it. Sometimes the coolest stuff, the most important discoveries, they happen in the most unexpected places.
Absolutely. Just think about all those amateur naturalists out there. They're making incredible observations just by paying attention to what's around them, their own backyards, really.
Yeah.
Or those citizen science projects where everyday people track bird migrations or analyze data from space.
It's amazing what we can do when we work together, right?
Yeah.
Sharing our curiosity, trying to understand the world better. And the best part is, you don't need to have some big goal in mind to justify being curious. Sometimes the best discoveries, they happen when you're just following your interests. No pressure, no expectations.
Exactly. And who knows, those little explorations, the ones that seem kind of random, they might just lead to the next big thing. I mean, some of the biggest scientific breakthroughs, they didn't start with a eureka moment. They started with someone saying, huh, that's funny.
It's that sense of wonder, that willingness to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? That's what leads to the best insights. It reminds me of that Isaac Asimov quote, the most exciting phrase in science, the one that comes before all the big discoveries. It's not eureka, that's funny. It's about that little spark of curiosity, the feeling that makes you want to dig deeper, to question everything.
And that spark, it can happen anywhere, anytime. Something you see in your own backyard, a question that pops into your head while you're reading, a problem you face every day that you suddenly want to solve.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into these accidental geniuses, I don't know about you, but I feel optimistic. Like discovering new things, it's not just for a select few. It's for all of us. It's part of being human.
It really is. We all share that responsibility and that amazing opportunity. The world is full of mysteries, just waiting for us to find them.
So here's to all of you listening. What will you discover? What unexpected paths will you explore? What little, seemingly insignificant thing will spark your curiosity, maybe turn into a lifelong passion, or even, just maybe, lead you to a breakthrough discovery? Embrace that accidental genius inside you, and let's see what amazing things we can find together.